This, my friends, is the Etobicoke Lakeshore Podcast. We love to call it L-Pod. My name is Mike. There is the publisher of the Etobicoke Lakeshore Press right there, my good friend, Roger Tumanieri. Hi, Raj.
Mike, good to see you today. How's everything?
Well, good. And, it's so funny. We see each other this way only because as we continue on through lockdown after lockdown, trying to curb the spread of a virus that this time last year we thought we'd be kicking in the butt, we are still on Zoom doing the show. So thank you for your patience doing that and for sticking with it.
Oh, yeah, my pleasure. You bring up a good point. I mean, last year at this time, you and I were doing these podcasts probably twice, 3 times a day, trying to wrap our head around, the pandemic, what life is like and how we're going to get through this. And I even recall one of our guests hoping that we'd be able to save the summer, last spring. And clearly that hasn't happened. And here we are over a year into this COVID-19 pandemic. And I thought it would be fitting as a theme for the Etobicoke Lakeshore Press May edition to talk about the pandemic, but also the vaccine rollout. It's very topical right now. There are, some, I think, pros and cons about the vaccine. I think that we're reading in the media. And I wanted to get a couple of folks from the neighborhood that our listeners would be familiar with. Certainly our readers would recognize these two gentlemen on the show. And maybe we could frame the podcast, since we're, into year 2 of this COVID-19 pandemic, as maybe we can create a quarterly update show. So let this be the first of which. And our guests today on the Etobicoke Lakeshore podcast are Dr. Tim Kodsi. He's the founder and medical lead at Mimico Medical. And Jonathan Nhan, he's the pharmacist owner at Shoppers Drug Mart in Long Branch. So, Tim,
well, you know what?
John, welcome.
I feel like we are among friends in many ways because these guys have both been part of the podcast before. By the way, subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening and visit EtobicokeLakeshorePress.com and you'll get these updates, and these discussions will continue right there. But these guys have become integral also in my life. Because John is actually my pharmacist, and often where I go for eggs, and most recently mineral water. Thank you. And of course, Mimico Medical forever. They keep watch on my ticker and other vital parts. So if anybody I could trust in the whole world to have this discussion, I'm delighted that these guys would join us.
Yeah, thank you guys for coming on the show. And Tim, if it's okay with you, maybe we'll start with you. And John, I'm going to essentially ask you the same question, but really from a more of a holistic perspective. I just trying to gather some understanding from your perspective. Like, what are your thoughts a year in plus to this pandemic? What are we looking at today in terms of issues, some positives, negatives, and what is your sort of prognosis, for lack of a better word, for the next, say, 6 months to a year in terms of where we're going to go and how this vaccine is going to play a role? Tim?
Well, thanks for having me, guys. It's a pleasure to be back. It's a big question. I'll start with a disclaimer and preface by saying that, there's still a lot we don't know about what's going on. And I think it's a complex issue. It's not just a medical issue. I think there's a lot of economic, social, political dynamics to it, among other things. And anytime we're looking at something in the medical field, we're trying to be as objective as possible, and that gets clouded. And also there's more confusion out there, so it does take time to dig through the literature and try to read the sources with whatever time we have left after our clinical care. But overall, obviously, this is something that, as you alluded to earlier, was perhaps not ever imagined to escalate to this magnitude, probably not even by the medical profession. We're going to get into the vaccine rollout, and definitely some good came out of that in terms of the rapid invention of these vaccines, and then the subsequent rollout. That to see that we're just over a year in, and the numbers that we've already vaccinated, let's just say here in North America, it's astounding. But at the same time, it is gonna there. This is an epoch-defining moment in human history, and it's certainly going to be the most consequential stretch of time in our lifetime, and will have long-lasting implications. What those are, I mean, I could take a guess, but as you know, humans are pretty bad at predicting the future. But at this juncture in time, without getting into too much detail, I think that's where my mind is at.
Thank you, Tim. No, I appreciate your perspective, certainly. And yeah, it is, I suppose, very tough to predict the future. I mean, I think people tried to do it a year ago and they were way off. And I think the worst case scenario wasn't even close to probably what we're dealing with today. And there have been all kinds of variables in the form of variants that have thrown people for a loop. So yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you, Tim.
The other perspective,
how about you, John? What are your thoughts?
The other perspective that Tim brought into this is that some amazing things happened. The development of a vaccine. I don't think anybody predicted if we needed one, which we do, and the virus has continued to spread, that we'd have it in this period of time, let alone be inoculating people. So that is a pretty incredible feat of humanity.
Yeah. Oh, certainly. And logistically quite the undertaking.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, absolutely. John. Oh, that's all right. A lot of great points there. And I think one of the things that really stood out is the fact that you're talking about going back and reading the sources and reading the literature, because a lot of the interaction that we see through, the news and stuff that we get about the pandemic is through news media, and you see headlines, and sometimes they're a little bit inflammatory and not the most illuminating, I suppose. So understanding what really goes on behind that, right? Like before we get into the vaccine rollout, like there's so much in the news about AstraZeneca and all of that, and that's kind of the little piece of that whole vaccine world that I interact with. But I think it's good to kind of go back to the source and, reach out and speak with someone who might have a little bit more detail in that. And we get questions about things like that all the time, like, oh, what do you think about this or that? And at the store level and at the pharmacy, I think it's a great thing to be able to offer, right? I think overall with the pandemic, yeah, we are 1 year in, but it's funny. It's exactly on the day of the anniversary of the pandemic was when we administered our first COVID-19 vaccine at the store. Wow! So that was quite a little moment there.
Well, that's an interesting time marker, isn't it? Because 1 year in a lifetime really isn't that much, and a lot transpired in that year to be able to watch that happen, especially as a retail outlet that had to shut down and make all these adjustments and everything. A year later, you're putting needles in arms.
Yeah. And it's funny. It's like even in that moment, like patients were coming in and saying, oh, it's like, it's 1 year and we're so happy. And in the back of my mind, it's like, I know this is a moment, but it's not sinking in yet. Yeah. So we're kind of still like on the ground level, still kind of wading through it all. But I think we're definitely moving in the right direction, despite, all the backs and forths with variants and things like that. I think there's, there's good reason to take some of that precaution, but also we're moving towards, a future.
I am curious about the vaccine itself, and both of you will have a perspective on this from the pharmaceutical and, of course, from the medical side of things. Speculation. The problem with media is that it's so run by society now, which, by the way, is not the problem. The problem is when somebody is misinforming a large group of people or, leading the narrative down a path that is not helpful. And I think that we've seen that an awful lot when it comes to the vaccine rollout and even the development of a vaccination. For example, people's speculation whether or not they would even take the vaccine. Dr. Tim, maybe you could give us some sort of comfort level when it comes to what went into creating this vaccine and why it's so essential that people get it. And then we'll bring it over to John afterward.
It's a couple points there. I'll take you on the first one when we talked about the involvement of media, and John mentioned this as well. I mean, I'll give you the classic example, right? When they started rolling out the AstraZeneca vaccine, what did we start hearing about? Do you guys remember? I'm sure you do, but it was really the blood clots,
Blood clots, yeah.
right? And these reports and headlines came out, and what it does is it creates speculation and skepticism about a product. When you go into the literature and you look at the numbers, the number of blood clots was around 4 in 1 million. So you may as well not drive on the 401, or maybe not get on a plane, or et cetera, if that's something you're concerned about. I think we have to be very, very careful when we talk about media coverage in a scientific field, because science is meant to be objective. And once that breaks down, it's no longer science. And the other thing about science is we don't have answers in science. Science is a bunch of questions that are being answered to formulate hypotheses that will be tested again in the future. Science was never meant to give us definitive answers. It was meant to continue the human race in the realm of learning in a systematic way, you see. So definitely concerns there, Mike. The other thing I'll mention, the reality is, a lot of these vaccines, especially the bigger name ones like Pfizer and Moderna, it is a new technology. It is a new way of delivering, of creating antibodies by delivering a vector into a biological cell and actually changing the DNA and thereby creating the antibodies. We've used this technology recently, and we've had it around for several years, and it's been used especially in the oncological field. So, the long-term risks of these vaccines, we just don't know them. Probably they're safe, most likely they're safe, but I'm just going to put it into perspective for everybody. You should get the vaccine, and I'll tell you why. Because especially with the new variants that are out there that are now affecting younger people, the risk of this virus on your health causing a catastrophic outcome is much, much, much higher, right? Even in the long term, than the after effects of these vaccines, in my opinion. And that's not just from a health perspective, but that's also from a socioeconomic perspective, so that we can stop the breakdown of the society around us and continue to have that strong institutional support for our citizens.
John,
wow, thank you, Tim.
That's an incredible perspective. And, just a flat out, here's why to get the vaccine, I think, has more value in the media than 100 reasons people have of their own for not getting it. What's the feedback that you're getting from the community? I mean, people are showing up to get the vaccines in your world, but what is some of the feedback you're getting that you think is a little misinformed?
Well, we have a lot of questions coming in, right? Like to the point of misinformation and all of that. And I do really like Dr. Tim's point about science not being fact necessarily, right? The scientific method and process is about looking at hypothesis and trying to disprove that. And only until you can disprove that is when you can say that this is probably our best guess. We do see a lot of people coming in asking these questions, and I completely agree. The long-term effects of actually getting the COVID infection and dealing with that is definitely much worse than getting the vaccine. Like at this point, millions of people across the world have already begun administering that. And, I hear people joke, oh, I'm going to grow a third arm or a third leg or something like that. And it's like, if people could do that, if people could make something that would grow a third arm or a third leg, I'm sure people would utilize that to their advantage and grow a third or a fourth arm to do extra stuff at this point.
I'd use it to grow hair. Can we do that? Let's see if we can get on that.
Yeah.
No, but that makes a good point. I think that what's fantastical in discussion can lead us away from what's practical in life. Roger, you and I have had this discussion that, especially with young kids, and Dr. Tim made the point perfectly. If you have young kids, the variants of this virus are chasing them down. Let's keep them safe. And so that's an excellent perspective. Can we talk for a little bit? Do you guys mind if we talk about some of the potential side effects of the vaccine? Because this is scuttlebutt that I'm only getting from the media as well, that certain applications of the vaccine can have side effects that last up to 24 to 48 hours. Dr. Tim, over to you first.
I think actually John may know a little bit more about this from me. My sense from what I'm seeing is that usually those types of what we call constitutional symptoms are happening after the second vaccine in a 2-shot series. In terms of the 1-shot vaccines, I'm not entirely sure. I know they have a little bit less efficacy, which would suggest maybe the autoimmune response is not as high, but that's just a theory. I would warn patients that after their second Pfizer, for example, to maybe take the day off and just hydrate and relax and take some Tylenol if you're getting a warm or achy, maybe to expect that kind of reaction.
John, what are you hearing?
Yeah, it's a similar type of thing. The first shot tends to be pretty innocuous. Like with any kind of vaccine, you have the usual like 24 to 48 hours afterwards, where you probably most likely will have a bit of a sore shoulder, and then your body's immune response. So that's like fever, aches, pains, that type of thing. That's pretty normal because your body's responding to something. Anecdotally, you hear the second dose kind of makes you feel a little bit more under the weather. Exactly, take the day off and take some time just to rest up. But then after that, you're good as new, ready to go forward. Even talking about like other vaccines that are 2-dose series, like the vaccine for shingles, we see that a lot, and I hear that a lot in my practice, where patients take the first dose and then they're generally fine, and then the second dose is they feel a little bit more sick, or just out for a day or two, and then they're back to normal. Right. So it's a similar type of thing. I think probably the immune response is coming, and it's not to say that you have to have those symptoms and you have to feel these things to have it be effective. It's just,
some people get these side effects and some do not.
Exactly. Yeah. We're all sometimes we look at, we're all people, we're all the same type of thing, but we're all very individual as well. Right. So there's a huge spread in terms of that reaction.
Well, thank you guys. And dare I ask, where do you think we'll be in a year from now, John?
Oh, you come to me first on this one.
Nostradamus, tell us, where will we be?
Well, we'll probably be right where we are now. I mean, in terms of physical location, we'll probably still be at home.
So.
I think we'll probably end up being able to go out a little bit more, especially with the vaccinations. There's this talk about getting to, I think the number is 70%, where you want to see herd immunity, which is like a certain amount of the population has the antibodies to protect against this virus. So hopefully with that, we'll kind of be out and about, back to some form of normal life. A year is a long time. A lot can happen in a year, right? Yeah. Like look what we are a year out, and even though we're still in the pandemic, a lot has happened, right? So,
yeah, very true. And Dr. Tim,
good job. Yeah, John, good stab at that tough question. I do agree that I anticipate we'll have reached herd immunity, and society will likely have opened up much more than it is now. But I'm also anticipating a lot of aftershocks from this past year plus in other forms of manifestation throughout our society. That being said, I wouldn't be surprised, and I'm not advocating for this, but I wouldn't be surprised if we continue to have some confusion and debate regarding the utility at that point of mask wearing, social distancing, and other measures that have been taken to prevent the spread. So, the question, if those types of measures remain, which will start to be directed to the medical community, it'll be, well, if we've reached herd immunity, why are we still doing this? And that's a question that I'm looking out for and anticipating for my patients.
Mm-hmm. Well, actually, on that point, anecdotally, like I think, and I'm not sure if you see this in your practice, but like flus, colds, all of that seems to be less. Like we're not seeing as many antibiotic prescriptions. There's not as many people coming in and saying, oh, I got the cold, I got to stay home from work, whatever. Mm-hmm. So I think the mask wearing and all of that is just good kind of infectious disease kind of prevention and control.
It does seem to be working, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It just makes sense in a way, right? Like, all of these things are many of these things are transmitted through airborne droplets and all of that stuff. So if you have a physical barrier on it, I think that's a bit of an indication. So
it leads me to my next question, just out of that one, that remark. Are we starting to take care of some common colds and viruses out there that just didn't get a chance to spread because we weren't on top of each other? We were mask wearing and disinfecting everything. Do you think that we've eliminated some of the spreads of these other flus going around?
Well, I think that we probably minimize them, but like all things, these are living organisms in a way, so they're going to find some way to survive. So they're going around somewhere, but it's not that I don't think they'll necessarily go extinct, because there's germs and stuff everywhere. Like we have bacteria all throughout our body, on our skin, and all of that. So I think it's not that we'll ever get rid of it, but I think taking these precautions does help to reduce the kind of even socioeconomic impact of it, right? Time off work and that type of thing.
About a year ago, a wise man said, I think we've witnessed the death of the handshake. Oh, actually, that was you, Dr. Tim. Do you think the handshake will come back?
I do. I think it'll come back, but I think it'll take a long time. This is a huge psychological hit on our society, on our global community. I certainly agree, much less prescriptions for antibiotics. The question is, have we eradicated some of these bacterial illnesses that often come after viruses because we're preventing the spread of those viruses? Or are we exposing the fact that we were grossly overprescribing antibiotics before the pandemic even began? So these types of things are going to become much more clear. All we can do is really guess at this time. It's probably multifactorial. And to that point, school-age kids are our most dangerous vectors in society. So the question becomes, do they remain masked, gloved, socially distanced, and what are the costs in terms of their development? And this is something we need to start looking at as well.
Yeah, these are big questions, very deep questions, and perhaps things that we can cover in time as we progress through this update series on the pandemic. And maybe in 3 or 4 months' time we can regroup and see where we're at that point. And I'd love to have you guys back on the show, certainly together, or maybe representatives from your respective businesses to talk a bit more about the pandemic and the prognosis thereof. But gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate your time. It's a very topical issue. To be honest, I've been kind of on the fence about the vaccine, but I think listening to both of you guys talk, I've made up my mind as to the direction I want to go in. And I think for our listeners too, I think they're going to glean a lot of value from this conversation. So I just want to thank you both for your time and coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
It was a pleasure, Roger. And if you get a third eye after you get the vaccine, make sure you call us over at Mimico Medical, okay?
I will. You'll be the first guy I call.
Ooh, I see a new podcast, the Third Eye Podcast with Roger Tumanieri. John, thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me here. It's always great to chat with you guys. And it's awesome just to hang out.
By the way, thank you to both of you for being nurturing members of our community. You reach out on every front. Every time something is happening in the community, it doesn't go unnoticed, and this is just another example of that. So way to go, and thank you.
Yeah, thank you both. So that our guests today again were Jonathan Nhan, he's a pharmacist owner at Shoppers Drug Mart in Long Branch, and also Dr. Timothy Kodsi, the founder and medical lead at Mimico Medical. Thank you both, gentlemen.
Thank you so much.
Roger, this was a really useful moment for us in the podcast series, so I thank you for putting it together. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast if you want the next update on what's happening right here in our community, just above the lake in Etobicoke, and we would love to have you as a member of our podcast listener team. By the way, tell a friend about it, and don't forget to visit EtobicokeLakeshorePress.com. Roger Tumanieri, thank you, my man.
Thank you, Mike.